Alright, so I'm here with the H10 Tender. The very last thing I have to do before this is completed is we're going to take the torch and heat up a couple of the brand new rivets that we put on that were welded in place. And the reason we're going to do that is to kind of make them look old and have them blend in with the old ones. When we fix things here, we don't want our repairs that we just did to stick out really bad. So I'm going to walk everybody through kind of what the trick and technique we use to make them look like they're old when they're really brand new. So here's a close-up shot of a rivet that wasn't touched during the restoration process. You can see on it that there's like pitting from it just rusting and being out in the elements. So this is what an old one looks like here. This whole row is old ones. Now they were sandblasted, but that wouldn't have been from the sandblasting. So to compare to what we just looked at, this is a new rivet. You can see it's shiny, there's no pitting on it. Even if you paint this, it's gonna stick out and look brand new. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna torch these, we're gonna heat them up with a torch and make them pit from the heat of the torch. So the first thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna zoom out here, is before I prep anything, I have a junction box here that is wired so that the marker lights and the rear headlight of the Tender are going to work when everything's put back together. I'm going to take the bolts off of this just to make sure when I heat it that I'm not going to heat up the wires that I just strung through, the 20 foot of wire, and damage it, so I can keep an eye on it. One thing I wanted to go over quick is when I do this, you have two options when you use a torch for heating. You can use a rosebud, which is a larger flame that's hotter, or you can use a cutting torch tip, which is designed to cut smaller things and thick metal as well. But I'm going to stick with the torch cutting tip because I want my heat isolated to a point. I don't want to be blowing a ton of heat all over the place that I would with this larger rosebud. So I'm going to pick this one and I'll show everybody how that goes. Trick with this is when I heat it with the torch, I'm going to get a kind of a glowing orange and it's going to start to spark. Once that happens, you'll see it'll pit and it'll look really good. So that's what we're going for. So I've let these cool for a little bit, and you can see now how they kind of have like a little pitted appearance. I was actually moving a little bit of the metal on the surface when I was heating it. You might have been able to see that. Now, if you compare these to the smoothness and newness of that one, and I'll zoom out here, you can really see there is a difference after we do this, and it does make them look a little better. And the nice thing is it doesn't really take that long. So I'm going to do the rest of these, and then I'm going to do an update on where we're at with the inside of the H10's tender. Before we go to the tender of the H10 for an update, I wanted to show another spot where I have to heat rivets. Now, these rivets hold this back decking plate in place. They're a lot smaller, so not much is going to change, except I'm not going to run as hot of a flame, and I'm not going to spend as long on them. Another top tip, when you're doing any kind of work like this, we're going to start from the front and work back, so we're not dragging our equipment and myself over hot metal. So we're going to work from forward, backwards across this whole plate. The last thing I'm going to show with heating rivets is if we have to heat a rivet over a delicate piece of metal. So this is a brass identification plate that goes on the back of the tender that basically told the railroad what tender it was. There were different size tenders, but would have been the class of tender would have dedicated how big it was. And then the engine number, but that didn't mean much. Notice it's not actually imprinted in the plate. Reason being is when they shopped the locomotives, they would swap tenders pretty frequently. So this was actually just painted on numbers. It wasn't actually numbers cast into the plate for the engine because they swapped them. So one thing with this is when these are welded on the back side, but when we put these in, this guy here is not the whole way back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to heat these up and make them look old, but I'm also going to take this guy, I'm going to give him a little bit of a hit. Now, there's a couple things with this you have to be critical of. You notice here there's some discoloration on this plate. That is because I brazed this and fixed this. This was cracked when we got it, so I fixed a couple cracks in this, so I have to be super careful. This has absolutely no give to it, so if you hit it, it's just going to break. It has no, the metal can't bend. Here's another one. So I'm going to try my best. I'm going to heat these ones up a little bit more, and I'm going to try to rectify this little error to make it look really, really good. So here we go. So here's the end result. Overall, I think it came out okay. I didn't really expect the rivets that were far out to go in. They came in a little bit, but more or less what I ended up doing, which I figured I would do, is I deformed the head and kind of mushroomed it over the hole. So you can see, so it doesn't look like it's sticking out, but it's still sticking out about as far as it was, but it's just a little mushroomed. And that's fine. Sometimes when they would hot rivet, they'd have more rivets that were more deformed than others. No big deal. No one will notice. So here's an update of the H10 tender. As of now, the entire outside of the tender has been sandblasted and painted. This is the stoker mechanism that would have delivered the coal to the locomotive. They burned a lot of coal, so they needed the assistance from a auger system to send the coal to the front into the firebox. You can see it looks pretty good. One of the doors is off for the tender, but this is the auger here. Tender looks really, really good. And this is just to stabilize it. This is not how this is going to stay once it's restored. It's just we're holding this stuff over until when we get to it, it's in a stabilized state, and that's one of the really important things. what I think is kind of cool, if you look up here, you can see there's these big teeth that would break up the coal when it would be running. And now normally here, there'd be plates so that if you were working here, you'd be able to control where it grabbed the coal from, and you'd be able to safely walk across. So this is the outside. Now we're going to go on the inside. I'm going to show everybody what I've been working on. This is the inside of the tender currently. Looks much different than before. You can see most of the scaling on the floor is cleaned up, at least cleaned up enough that the sandblaster is going to be able to sandblast and paint the inside of the tender. As I was doing this, I found some interesting things, like you can see some daylight poking through there. I think that this was a repair that they did after the engine came to the museum. Reason I say that is because if I can see daylight through here, through their welds, they didn't, obviously wouldn't have been able to hold water. So when the day comes I get to this, I'm probably just gonna cut that out again. And I'm gonna show everybody how to do a proper repair to that. So if I was welding that, I'd weld the outside first, and then I'd do an inside repair, and that would make it waterproof. I try to do everything, again, that if one day someone wanted to reactivate these long after I'm gone, that the amount of work wouldn't be as bad to get it going again. Now, coming back to the end of the tender, here's the hole for where I've been dumping everything through. If you come back to the tender, one of the next videos we're going to discuss, if you look in the front, I'm going to put my light down. If you look at the front, what that is, that's not a metal plate. It's hard to see. That's actually a grating. There's holes in it. And basically what that did was that stopped any scale from getting forward through there. So what's in front of that, the tender pickup tubes for the injectors are there, and they wanted to keep anything from going through. Now the problem is we have to get in there to sandblast, and the bolts are rusted to the point where I need to cut them out. So the next video we're going to talk about, you can see there's a whole bunch of scale I haven't cleaned up there yet. The next thing we're going to talk about is removing them. We're going to have to get them removed so we can get to the front sandblast. But anyway, thanks for joining me again. The next video you'll see is me cutting these out.